Welcome back, friend. Today I'm gearing up for a big cooking day in the kitchen. I'm going to be making 7 casseroles. These are all going to be freezer-friendly casseroles. I'm getting down to the wire here, and I want to start stocking my freezer for postpartum meals for my family. We're going to be batch cooking a lot of these steps, and I'm going to start off
with a big batch of tomato sauce.
We're adding in the diced tomatoes for texture. I'm going to add in tomato paste for thickening the sauce and to give us that rich tomato texture. And if you use your favorite tomato sauce, it'll give you the perfect taste for your family.
This big batch of tomato sauce is going to be used in a few of the recipes that we're going to be cooking. Of course, a big portion of it is going to be used with the meat sauce for the lasagna and the lasagna stuffed peppers, but I'm also going to be using it to flavor the cottage pie. It's going to get mixed in with the shredded chicken for the chicken enchiladas, and it's also going to be going into our chili mac and cheese. I'm liking this sauce super simply here, but feel free to add in some of your favorite herbs to cook along with the sauce. Stir everything together, and then I'm going to let it simmer away, covered on the stove, while we move on to the next step. Next up, we're going to get working on the base flayers for the ground beef.
Since we have so many recipes to get through today, I want to do it as quickly and easily as possible. So I'm going to be cutting 4 onions and 12 cloves of garlic in my food processor. I have 5 pounds of ground beef here, and that's going to do all of my, I think 5 recipes that we're making with ground beef.
I'm just going to roughly chop the onions and add the garlic cloves into the food processor. I'm doing this on the pulse setting until everything's cut down into a fine dice. You can stop halfway through and scrape down the bottom and sides of the food processor just to make sure everything is getting cut evenly.
And since we're cooking a great big batch of food today, make sure you have your biggest pot.
I have my large Dutch oven preheated to medium heat here. Then add in enough oil to coat the bottom of the pan. Then I'm going to add in the big batch of diced onions and garlic. I'm just going to let these cook down and slightly caramelize before adding in the ground meat. I have 6 pounds of ground beef here that I'm going to add right into the pot. I'm just breaking up the chunks of meat here, and I'm going to let it cook down with the onions and garlic. I'm just going to keep stirring the meat occasionally and continuing to break up any of the chunks.
Next up, we're going to prepare the rest of the veggies that I need for the casseroles. For most of these, I'm going to be using frozen vegetables because it makes everything super quick and easy, but the one thing that I'm going to cook fresh is the mushrooms.
I've already cleaned these button mushrooms, but you can use your favorite type of mushroom for these recipes. I have about 2 pounds of mushrooms here, and I'm just roughly slicing them. Then I'm going to cook them down and brown in a pan with a little bit of oil. And since I have so many mushrooms to work through, I'm going to do this step in batches. Now my sauce has nicely cooked down and my ground beef is ready. So it's time to start assembling some of these ground beef casseroles. I just have one of my very large cast iron skillets here, which I've preheated to medium heat. I'm going to portion out what I need for each casserole and add this to the pan. First up, we're going to mix the cottage pie. Add in 1 pound of the cooked ground beef, along with the frozen vegetables. I'm just using frozen peas and frozen corn here, and I wasn't able to find any frozen carrots at the grocery store, so I've just cut some fresh carrots here instead. Add in 1/3 of the cooked mushrooms, and mix everything together. Then I'm going to sprinkle on top 1/3 cup of all-purpose flour. Stir this into the filling. This is going to help thicken the sauce. I'm going to pour on top 2 cups of beef broth. And finally, I'm going to add in about 1/2 cup of the tomato sauce. Stir this all together until you see the mixture just start to thicken and simmer. And my cottage pie filling is finished and ready to go. Give it a little season with salt and pepper to your taste. Now I'm just using disposable aluminum casserole dishes for these recipes, but you can use any freezer and oven safe containers that you have on hand. I'm going to set that casserole aside and move on to the filling for my ground beef pot pie. Add another pound of the ground beef to the skillet. And I'm going to add in the exact same vegetable mixture that we used in the cottage pie. The only difference for the filling for this recipe is that I'm going to be making it a creamy gravy type sauce instead of a tomato-based sauce. I'm going to sprinkle on top the same amount of all-purpose flour and stir this into the filling. And then once again, add in the 2 cups of beef broth. Stir this into the mixture until it starts to simmer and thicken. Season the filling with salt and pepper to your taste. And then finally, I'm going to pour in a 1/4 cup of heavy cream. And now my creamy ground beef pot pie recipe is ready to move into my casserole dish. The toppings for these 2 recipes are also going to be different. For this pot pie, I'm going to be using a biscuit top crust. And for the cottage pie, of course, I'm going to be using some mashed potatoes. And this is going to go into one of my aluminum casserole dishes and get set aside. The next recipe that I'm going to put together is the chili mac and cheese. I'm just adding some oil to the bottom of my large sauce pot here, and I'm going to add in 2 diced bell peppers. Let these cook down and soften in the oil, and then I'm going to add in another pound of the ground beef mixture. And for those chili flavors, I'm going to sprinkle in 2 tablespoons of chili powder, 1 teaspoon of dried chili flakes, and 2 teaspoons of ground cumin. Stir these into the meat, and then I'm going to add in 3 cups of beef broth, and then 3 cups of the tomato sauce. I'm adding in a package of macaroni noodles, and that's just going to cook along with everything else in the pot. And as the pasta's cooking, it's also going to help thicken the sauce. Finally, I'm going to add in a can of drained pinto beans. Stir everything together, and once the pasta's cooked, you can remove it from the heat. Finally, I'm just going to stir in some grated cheddar cheese. Adjust any salt and pepper to your taste, and this casserole is ready to go. I'm going to store this one in my casserole dish, and then when I'm ready to bake it, I'm also going to add a layer of cheese on top and let the whole thing brown up in the oven. You can either grate your cheese now and store it in a Ziploc bag on top of the freezer casserole. But since grating cheese isn't overly time consuming for me, I'm just going to grate mine fresh right before I'm ready to bake it. Next up, we're moving on to a lasagna. I'm going to stretch this recipe out into 2 separate freezer meals. One's just going to be a classic lasagna, and the other one is going to be lasagna stuffed peppers. The first thing I'm going to do is mix up the ricotta cheese layer. I have 2 containers of ricotta cheese in my bowl, and I'm going to add in 2 eggs and sprinkle in some nutmeg. Stir this together and then set it aside while I move on to the meat sauce. Pretty much all the rest of my tomato sauce is going to go into making these 2 lasagna recipes. I'm just going to remove 3 cups of the sauce, and that's going to get set aside for one of my chicken recipes later on. Now I'm going to mix together the rest of the beef and the tomato sauce. Now all I have to do is assemble the lasagna. I'm just going to put a really thin layer of the beef and tomato sauce on the bottom, and that just makes sure that nothing sticks to the bottom of the pan. Put a layer of the oven-ready lasagna noodles on top, and then another layer of the meat sauce. And one of my daughters is helping me layer on another layer of the oven-ready lasagna noodles. And then I'm going to layer on top about 2/3 of the ricotta cheese mixture. I'm just going to leave the last third aside for the lasagna stuffed peppers. I'm just putting it in little clumps all over the top of the lasagna noodles. That way I can kind of press it all out evenly and it won't get mixed into the layers underneath. Finally, I'm going to put on the last layer of lasagna noodles and then the last layer of sauce. And I'm just making sure to hold back enough of the sauce to do the lasagna stuffed peppers next. Spread out the last layer evenly and then the lasagna is done. Now of course when I go to bake this lasagna, I'm going to put a layer of grated cheese on top. But since I'm freezing this casserole, I'm going to leave off the cheese layer for now. Then when I'm ready to bake it, I'm going to grate it fresh right before popping it into the oven. To bake this lasagna from frozen, I'm going to remove any of the plastic wrap and just cover it with foil. Then bake it in a preheated 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius oven. And it's going to bake from 60 to 75 minutes. Then remove it from the oven, remove the foil, and place it back in a 425 degrees Fahrenheit or 220 degrees Celsius oven. And let it bake for about 15 minutes, or until the cheese is nicely browned on top. And honestly, out of all these freezer casseroles, this lasagna recipe is definitely the fan favorite. For this next recipe, it's going to be pretty much exactly the same as the lasagna that we just made, except for instead of noodles, we're going to be using bell peppers. To prepare the peppers, I'm going to slice each one in half and then scoop out the seeds. Layer the pepper halves into the casserole dish. And now all we have to do is add in the filling. I have the rest of my meat and tomato sauce here, and I'm going to put a scoop inside of each one. Don't completely fill them at this point. We still need to add 2 more layers. Next up, I'm going to put a spoonful of the ricotta cheese mixture inside of each bell pepper. And to finish off this recipe, I'm going to put a scoop of the meat sauce mixture on top of each bell pepper. And this recipe is ready to get covered and popped into the freezer. And once again, for this freezer-friendly casserole, we're going to make sure to cover it with grated cheese right before baking.
Next up, we're going to get started with the chicken dishes. And for this, I'm going to need to cook and shred 10 chicken breasts. I'm just using boxed frozen chicken breasts for these recipes, but you can use whatever chicken you have on hand.
I'm making my chicken recipes and all the toppings for the casseroles on day 2 here. Today I'm going to be making 3 chicken casseroles.
Now while my chicken's cooking away, I'm going to get started on the base flavors for all these casseroles. To get started, I'm going to fry up 3 onions and 6 cloves of garlic. Then we're going to set a third of that aside for our enchiladas, and we're going to add some celery and carrots and cook that along with the onions and garlic.
Today we're going to be making a chicken shepherd's pie, chicken enchiladas, and a chicken pot pie. I'm cutting my vegetables pretty finely here. This is just going to help them cook down and soften quickly for my casseroles. I'm cutting 4 ribs of celery and 6 carrots. And I'm adding them to my large Dutch oven, which I have preheated to medium heat. I have some oil in the bottom of the pan and I've already started to fry my garlic and onions. I'm just going to cover the vegetables and stir them occasionally to help them soften and cook down. And while I was cooking down the vegetables, my chicken has finished and it's ready to shred. I've just set the chicken breast aside to cool down, that way I can easily shred it without burning my fingers. But you can also use 2 forks to shred your chicken breast. I'm going to set aside 3 of my shredded chicken breasts, and that's going to be for the enchilada casserole. And all the rest of the shredded chicken I'm going to add straight into the pot with the vegetables. This is going to be for my chicken pot pie and my chicken shepherd's pie. Give everything a stir and then cover the pot and let everything cook down until it's soft. Now I'm going to sprinkle in about 2/3 of a cup of all-purpose flour. Stir this into the chicken filling mixture. Pour in 4 cups of chicken stock. I'm going to stir this into the filling and let it come to a simmer. Give it a stir occasionally until you see the sauce start to thicken. Season with salt and pepper to your taste, and then I'm going to add in some heavy cream. This is going to add the perfect rich and creamy texture to the sauce. And now we're ready to assemble the 2 casseroles. I'm just splitting this chicken mixture between 2 casserole dishes. First, for the chicken pot pie, I'm going to add in the last ½ pound of mushrooms. Stir this into the chicken filling, and then I'm going to set this casserole aside. And now for my chicken shepherd's pie, I'm going to add in some frozen corn and some frozen peas. Stir this into the chicken filling mixture, and then this casserole is ready to get set aside until I've made the toppings. And now finally, we're going to make the last casserole. These are the chicken enchiladas. For the spices, I'm going to stir in 1 tablespoon of ground chili powder, 1 teaspoon of cumin, a half teaspoon of dried oregano, a 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, a half teaspoon of chili flakes, a half teaspoon of salt, and a 1/4 teaspoon of pepper. I'm going to add in the 3 cups of the tomato sauce that I set aside yesterday. Stir all the spices into the sauce. Then I'm going to set aside about half of the sauce and add the shredded chicken to the other half. I'm just going to stir to make sure all of the shredded chicken is well coated. And now all I have left to do is assemble the enchiladas. I have some large flour tortillas here, and I'm just going to scoop some of the chicken mixture into each one. Add some grated cheese to the top, roll it up, and line it into the casserole dish. I'm just going to continue filling and rolling each one until everything is used up. And to finish off my chicken enchiladas, I'm going to add the tomato mixture to the top of my enchiladas. And this casserole is ready to get covered and frozen. And of course, right before going into the oven, I'm going to make sure to add a generous layer of grated cheese to the top of my enchiladas. And of course, just like the other cheesy casseroles, you can grate the cheese now and put it into a Ziploc bag. Then store this along with the frozen casserole. Or you can grate your cheese fresh when you're ready to bake. Now all my casseroles are finished, and it's time to move on to the toppings. Other than the casseroles that are covered with cheese, which are already finished, we're going to be making some mashed potatoes to top our casseroles, and we're also going to be making some biscuits. For my mashed potatoes, I'm just going to wash, peel, and chop my potatoes, cover them with water, and then bring them to a boil for about 20 minutes or until they're fork tender. Then you can either mash your potatoes with a potato masher, or you can use a potato ricer. And since I'm making these as a mashed potato crust on top of my casseroles, I want the potatoes to be a pretty thick mixture. So instead of adding milk or cream to my potatoes, I'm just going to be adding some butter. I'm just going to let this melt into the warm potatoes and then mash them together. Give them a taste and season with salt and pepper. And now my mashed potatoes are ready to get scooped on top of my casseroles. The first mashed potato crust is going to go on top of my cottage pie. And my next mashed potato topping is going to go on top of my chicken shepherd's pie. I'm just using an ice cream scoop to scoop it all on top of the casseroles. Then I can easily spread it out without mixing it into the filling. These 2 casseroles are finished, and they're going to get covered with a layer of saran wrap and then a layer of aluminum foil.
Now, other than some grated cheese, the last topping we're gonna need for our casseroles is some biscuits. This is going to be for our 2 biscuit top pot pie recipes, the chicken pot pie and the ground beef pot pie. The first thing I'm going to do is prepare the butter. I'm gonna be making a double batch of this recipe for biscuits, and you can do this whole thing by hand in a bowl, but I'm going to be grating my butter. And then to make everything super quick and easy, I'm going to make everything in the bowl of my stand mixer.
Normally when I make biscuits, I just cut the butter into little cubes, but I thought I'd give this grating method a try. I'm just grating my butter in sections here. That way I can do a few layers of flour and a few layers of butter. That way none of the butter sticks back together again. Along with the flour and butter, to the bowl I'm going to add in a 1/4 cup of sugar, 2 tablespoons of baking powder, 1.5 tablespoons of salt, and I'm just going to let this all mix together on low in the stand mixer. Then I'm going to gradually pour in 2.5 cups of cold milk. Once the batter just clumps together, you can stop the mixer. Then I'm going to tip it out onto a lightly floured counter. I'm going to handle this dough as little as possible, since the less you handle your biscuit dough, the more tender your biscuits are going to be in the end. I'm just going to flatten the dough out with my hands, and then fold it over onto itself a few times. This is just going to give me a few added layers of lamination with the butter. Then I'm just going to gently use a rolling pin to roll the dough out. I'm just rolling it out to about 1 inch thickness. And now I'm ready to cut my biscuits. You can either use a biscuit cutter for this or a large cookie cutter, or you can just use an upturned cup. Once all my biscuits are cut out, I'm just going to layer them onto some lined baking sheets. I'm going to place these right into my freezer to flash freeze. And then I'm ready to assemble my 2 pot pie casseroles. I'm just going to place a layer of plastic wrap on top of the filling. Add a layer of the frozen biscuits, and then I'm going to cover it again with plastic wrap. Finally, I'm going to cover the whole casserole with a layer of aluminum foil. And these 2 casseroles are ready to get popped into my freezer to store until I'm ready to bake them. When I'm ready to bake these casseroles, I'm going to remove the layer of biscuits first, then I can cook the filling right from frozen in my oven. When it's heated through, I'm going to layer on my biscuits and then bake the casserole with the biscuit crust for another 20 minutes.
I have my beef casseroles ready and they're ready to get popped into the freezer. To store these casseroles, I'm going to wrap everything completely with plastic wrap first, and then I'm going to wrap it with tin foil. Label each one and write the instructions on the top of each one. That way you'll know exactly what to do when you pull it out of the freezer. You can pull any of these casseroles out of the fridge the night before and let them defrost overnight, then bake the next night for dinner. Or you could even pull them straight from the freezer and bake them from frozen. Hopefully this video gave you some inspiration to make your own budget-friendly and freezer-friendly casseroles to help you with easy make-ahead meals that are delicious and family-friendly that you can bake any day of the week. Now I'll let you go get into your own kitchen and bake up some easy freezer-friendly meals. Thanks so much for getting into the kitchen with me today, friend. I'll see you in the next video.
And as always, you can find links to all the written recipes in the description box below. If you're a fan of deliciously simple vintage recipes and old-fashioned skills, then you'll want to check out this next video. Thanks for stopping by.